point about this particular talk is that I'm involved in preserving material, astronomical material for the British Astronomical Association, and also for archiving our National Museum of Computing in Great Britain. So I'm quite keen to sort of try and do the same sort of thing for the Eclipse community. So, the talk effectively is a joint talk prepared by myself and Michael Zieler. Michael was unable to make it today and he sends his apologies. He has produced on the outside a poster with all the total eclipses until the year 2050. I think he will be selling copies of that that I think Glenn's got. Have you got a few copies of that? Oh, okay, they'll be available for people to purchase at a small cost. But one of the apologies he wants to make is that although the map includes the 2012 eclipse, in the bottom left-hand corner where they're tabulated, it's not included there. So if you do get a more up-to-date version, I'll tell you how to get that later, then that information will be on there as well. So there's Michael sitting at home preparing the maps. Michael is a cartographer and does absolutely stunning eclipse maps. So what I really want to do is to try and get a sort of general consensus of why it's important to centralize and get all solar eclipse material together. I mean, you've already heard that the previous speaker, Glenn Schneider, has all sorts of material available, but where do you get hold of it? Do you just trawl the internet? Do you go onto Google and spend ages trying to find it? Or there's no particular way in which it makes it easy to get. Similarly, the historical material that was talked about earlier on, again, how do you get hold of that information? So let's run through some ideas and see how we go. So that's the problem at the moment. If a researcher wants access to eclipse-related material, the first port of call is probably a simple internet search engine. I've just discussed that. And that's what you might do if you type in changing solar corona. That's what might appear. But if you want to find details, you'll also find that corona appears in various other things like advertisements and so on. So you really want to try and cut out all of that when you're trying to do your research. Well, this is the problem. This is just an extremely small smattering of Eclipse websites from various contributors. I think I've got yours amongst them, Glenn, have I? But you know, things like Eclipse glasses are available on there. My website detailing future eclipses, Ecliptomaniacs from Ireland, and so on. So all these websites, how do you find the information on there? Just by sort of randomly trying to find your way through the internet. So I think the solution is to provide a single site that provides access to everything to do with eclipses. So you literally find get a domain name that is eclipses.com, although of course that's been taken. We'll find a domain name that's quite a particular website. So if you want that kind of material, you've got to go somewhere else for it. So I think the thing is I'm not proposing a website where all the material exists on this website. It's just the links to those particular aspects of it. This is Michael's homepage. Again, just a copy of it. You can see that the eclipses throughout the world are marked on there, and you can point at the various eclipses, and you can go to various eclipse maps to see them. If you go to the various sections, you can't read them, but there's the page for Australia, and he has all sorts of different resolutions and maps for that. So Michael's pages are extremely well catalogued and quite easy to find your way around. But that's not the same for a lot of other eclipse sites. Well, who will organise such an archive? Well, I don't feel I'm capable of organising it myself. I haven't got the skills, but I'd be willing to be involved in coordinating it and try and get it together. But will it be curated by just a few people, or will it be one key person that does it? Will it be a wiki open site available to anyone in the world, or do you have to join, and so on? These are the questions I really want to try and get answers to. I'm not intending to propose answers to them. I think it needs to be done via discussion, so perhaps we get together an email mailing list and we discuss it and try and get a consensus at the end. Financing it is obviously going to be difficult, but on the other hand, nowadays compilation of a website and the cost of a domain name isn't particularly expensive, so it could be done reasonably cheaply. I'll skip through these because I want to try and make this particularly short. But there are lots of questions involved that are very difficult. What are the criteria for including items on websites? What are the standards for digital reproduction? I think we can avoid all that if we just use links to particular sites while we're doing it. So once the conference is finished, I really want to get a mailing list together so that we can actually find out, get feedback from delegates in order to provide a core group that can determine the way forward for this particular proposal. I expect people to log their interest after the conference, and I'll be saying how to do that later. So let's go through some examples of materials for inclusion, because if I just talked about what we're going to do, it would be extremely boring. Well, these are the kind of examples, I think. If you want to find Eclipse maps, where do you go? If you want to find details about Eclipse books, where do you go? What about learned reports, general reports, newspaper cuttings, photography, links, ephemera? There's so much surrounding total eclipses that need to be pulled together in a nice way. Well, let's go and have a look. Here's one of Michael Zieler's maps. If you wanted to get a copy and see details about the 1654 map, he puts it together nicely with a nice old map that was the original, and together with a more modern map. And I won't talk technicalities, but in the old days, cartographers drew the map effectively by just calculating 3 points. They calculated the beginning, the end, and the middle point, and on the right projection drew a straight line through them. Well, as you can see from the curve, although the curve when projected isn't quite the same as drawing a straight line. So there are difficulties between differences between where the eclipse actually tracked that they thought it did and where it does on there. So that's just one particular aspect. If you want to go on from maps, then you want to do a bit of research, then here's some information on the 1654 eclipse, but where on earth would you find that? I mean, how did I find this? I think I found it by complete random search and eventually stumbled upon it. Similarly, 1706 total eclipse. I'm only going to give a few examples of mapping. This is very difficult to see, but there are some lines that draw up here on this map, which correspond to Michael Zieler's map here. But again, where would you go if you wanted a copy of that? Two interesting eclipses, because we've heard about Sir Edmund Halley in the past. He was very keen on getting information about the 1715 eclipse to try and work out exactly the dynamics of eclipses and the limits. And he produced a paper that was circulated, I think, for a cost of a penny throughout the most of southeast England, just given out to people and asked them to log whether they saw totality or not. And this was one of the extremely rare eclipses in these latitudes that exceeds 4 minutes. It was nearly 4.5 minutes long. And you can see from the width of it, this particular track. And he did, again, you can see from the map here, and the actual place, the limits of the eclipse, how he managed to determine exactly where the eclipse ended by asking people whether they saw it here down near Brighton or whether they saw it up here. So that was quite an early bit of scientific research. So that was something else you might want to sort of get your hands on that type of research. If we go on to books, well, there's all sorts of books. A lot of them are out of print. These are books from my collection. There's a particularly interesting one here by Mabel Loomis Todd, and she not conducted an expedition, but she went out in the Pacific on a yacht and documented seeing this particular eclipse and all her travels. And I took a look at my book and thought, that's interesting. Just had a look at a website that dealt in second-hand books to see if it was a particularly common book. It's not very common, and on websites that deal in second-hand books, it was worth about $200 to $220. And when I opened the front cover, it's actually signed by her, so I feel quite honoured. So there are lots of books, palimpsest and astronomical books that you might want to get hold of. Some of them have been digitized and some of them are available from other mediums, but not all of them are. Here's a copy of some more books. There's a Isabel Lewis handbook book on eclipses, a handbook of solar eclipses. And there's a page from it which actually shows details of the eclipses that she was aware of. Now here are some learned reports. We were talking about the 1871 eclipse here in India. A learned report is actually not just a book that's written. I'm talking about papers that were published as a result of expeditions. So an eclipse here, it's 1910 to Tasmania. Another one here, I can't quite see what the date of that is. And a German one here. Again, that perhaps needs translating, so those of us that don't speak German could read that one. So these 3 books here are learned reports. There's a few more. These are all parts of my collection, so obviously I need to digitize them at some point to make them available. And these are, there's an annual eclipse of the sun report here. These are just the front covers from them. A few more. Eclipse meteorology with allied problems. I'm sure Jay, I'm not sure if that's a particular one I sent you, Jay, is it? It is, so that's a copy that Jay already has. General reports. Well, what do the newspapers publish? When I was producing this booklet here on total solar eclipses from the year 1 to 3000, I did this about 20 years ago, covering the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a small island, and so there's not that many eclipses that go through it. What I tried to do was for every eclipse from, say, 1502 and so on, is to find a newspaper report or a reference in a book and see what they said. There's a particular eclipse here that says, it's called the, I don't want to read it all, I'm sorry. He talks about how the sun went out in the middle of the day. This was 1764. So those kind of things you need to get, and you need to research through old newspapers, archives, or magazines like Popular Astronomy, or in this particular case, the Daily Telegraph Guide to the Eclipse, which is a publication that they did in Britain for the 1927 eclipse. Newspaper articles, well, there's a Scientific American one, particularly about an eclipse seen in California. Published 1889, so I imagine it refers either to the 89 or 88 eclipse. More up to date, this was reprinted in the Guardian British newspaper in around 1999, telling people about the 1927 eclipse, actually just duplicating a report that came out from that particular time. So that's one that is quite readily accessible, but some of the other ones aren't. Obviously, you can get research papers on, in this particular case, the sun's gravitational field from all sorts of learned societies. Well, how do you know what societies have published them? So again, once we can coordinate a website with all this information that's available, we can start to sort of make it more readily available for researchers. Photographs, I particularly like that one, a 1907 photograph. Taken, I think, from some part of Siberia. You can see it's lots of snow and extremely cold. It's very interesting because it's in colour. I don't know even now whether that's been artificially coloured or not. Were there any colour photographs in 1907? I also have some photographic plates of eclipses that I've got, and these are photographs of the 1927 eclipse from northern England, around the Giggleswick area, and this is the 1929 eclipse. It's got a particularly nice prominence on this. Again, just to reinforce, these photographs are much, much better when seen on a screen rather than with all these lights. These are quite high definition photographs. Art. Well, someone's actually combined my favourite photographer, Ansel Adams, with a picture of an eclipse. You can see the sun there, and they've actually put a streak sort of light there. But again, if you can see it, it's more like black and it's more like very steep contrast here. The original image is beautiful shades of grey. And if you want to do research into art and what people have drawn or composed from that, then again, where do you go for these kind of images? That's a close-up of it, a little bit slightly better rendition. But again, this is artificial. Someone's drawn the eclipse in. Art also includes Indian scenes. Here we are. There's a picture, and it says, I like this one here. It's a total solar eclipse being gazed at by a languidly reclining lady with a musical instrument on her bed. I mean, I picked that up straight from the site, so I haven't made that up. And it's part of one that was obviously on display at Nehru Planetarium, which is just over the road. I'm not sure if people are going to have time to go over there, but I don't think we will. Ephemera, in other words, things surrounding eclipses. This is a sales brochure. If you wanted to go and see the 1912 eclipse, you'd pick that particular brochure up, and it would tell you the itinerary, where you were visiting and when. So I think that's particularly interesting to pick up and see what people were doing in terms of eclipse travel. This is one that is for the 1927 eclipse, and it's advertising a coach tour. So it just says that you cross the line of totality from Southport to Hartlepool. You leave at 4:30 in the morning. Totality is at 5:24 a.m. It was a June eclipse in 1927, and the path is 50 miles wide. So they've got all that kind of detail correct. That's all down there. And it tells you what to look for in terms of decreasing light, ruddy glow, lowering clouds, increasing wind, falling temperature. It tells you what to look out on there. But that was just an ordinary coach brochure that you could have joined a little coach trip to see. Other ephemera that you might like to see are things like, this is a railway poster published, so you would see that on a railway station. And then these are postcards that you could get for the eclipse in 1927. And up in northern Britain, there is a plaque on a wall marking the centre line for the 1927 eclipse just on the edge of a house. And that, I think, was taken about 10 years ago. Whether it's still there, I don't know. But all these things are available if you know where to look. The last total solar eclipse was over New York City, and I thought it was worth showing a brief. I've lost that particular. Yeah, early videos are, I think, quite rare. This is a particular one that I picked up, and this was showing the last total solar eclipse over New York City. There's no sound to it, so I haven't got to worry about that particular aspect. But effectively what it's doing is, if it's working, it was working early when I tried it. Okay, it's actually a balloon trip in a dirigible. And rather than play it all the way through because it's quite long, I'll sort of hop to different frames. So there it is coming out of the hangar, and there it is taking off. And there they are all inside preparing. I think they're all wrapped up extremely warm because I think it was a January. So very cold, they are sitting there in their coats. And then things start to happen, and you start to see partial phases. And at some point, totality. And then obviously you get, it all goes back after totality. I think totality was fairly short, and it runs through the whole of totality. And that's available again if you know where to look. But where on earth would you go in order to find that? Would a Google search just bring it up? And I think the chances are that it probably wouldn't, and you'd have to search around for quite a lot to find that. So handwritten reports. There are plenty of those available, and I doubt if many of those are on the internet. This is a handwritten report of again, the 1927 eclipse. Being British, this is a particular eclipse. I find easy to get hold of material. And that's all the writing about someone explaining their experience. And just like Glenn did most eloquently, telling you about the passion of seeing an eclipse, when you read that, he brings across how wonderful the sight was and how you really must go and see another one. Poems and quotes. Here's a poem, and I won't read it all the way through. Let you have a quick look at it. So that's a poem really from about 648 BC from the Greek lyric poetry. Here's some more. There's some from the Bible, from Paradise Lost, and early Greek descriptions, poetic descriptions of eclipses. So if you want those kind of information, where on earth do you find those? You just search through the Bible and hope to key in the word sun and hope you get it. The whole point about this, the idea of the talk, is to try and bring all of these things together so people find them much more easily. So the conclusion really is that, that we'll try and present all the material in its current location. In other words, we have to avoid the copyright issue of finding it. That's up to the people who provide the original websites, and we'll try and provide one particular website which will access all the others. But of course it needs a lot of research just to do that particular one. So who's got the time to coordinate this? I mean, I could coordinate it. I don't feel I necessarily have the skills, so maybe we need to pull some people together. And that's it. So really, give us some feedback if you want. It's not the kind of talk that needs a lot of questions and answers, but if you've got any questions, then I'll field them.
Had a paid, if it became a paid site, you'd be at the top of the ratings or at the side, and then you wouldn't actually pop up.
It's an interesting problem, but without name dropping too much, I know some fairly senior Google employees who might point me in the direction of getting it fairly high on the list. I mean, we could consider actually advertising it.
Yes, if you had a paid, if you became a paid site, you'd be at the top of the ratings or at the side, and then you wouldn't actually pop up.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think if the website it actually did develop, then the Eclipse community could actually start to publicise it more widely, and therefore it would get publicity that way. And
yes.
I think obviously if you choose an extremely good domain name that actually has Eclipse in the title, then that will also appear quite well on the search. It depends on all the meta characters that are put in the web page as well.
The link farm, or how this is called, is of course link rot, as it's called, that websites just disappear or change their address. After every Eclipse, in the weeks afterwards, I collect about every link to Eclipse reports about this particular one, and others do the same. And if you go back to these collections just after a year or so, many of these websites have disappeared into nirvana. So the question is, for scholarly use, it would be good to also preserve the original material somewhere in an accessible way. If you just regularly copy everything on DVDs and put them away somewhere. But if a real scholar goes after this and wants this material, then working with an old retired link farm is really not the way to go.
Well,
would that be a compromise? Would that be a compromise solution?
Well, we have to start somewhere, and I don't think I'm proposing that I actually start up an archiving site. In other words, if the site disappears, then that's not my problem, to be quite blunt. But there are many ways of checking whether, in fact, links are still active or not. And I think at say you did every 6 months a check which links are active, and you either deleted them or replaced them with a more up-to-date one, it would have to be more of a manual task, I think. But you're quite right.
Can you please define the term ephemera?
Oh, the word ephemera. I don't know the exact dictionary definition of ephemera, but what I mean by ephemera is little things like T-shirts or stamps or material that's been produced in order to promote or commemorate an eclipse. So, you know, eclipse glasses, pictures of eclipse glasses or badges or T-shirts or that's that kind of thing. Does that answer the question?